Hi, everyone. I'm Amber Young.
And I'm Barbara Phillips.
And this is
Let's Talk EVM.
And to get started, I'd like to state that all of the views that are stated here in the podcast are our own and are not the views of the United States government.
Welcome to our podcast, where this week we will be talking about the cost of EVM. So before we get into some soapbox moments, any initial thoughts, Barbara?
There's a lot to cover with this topic, but with our guest, it will be illuminated.
Okay, so we will wait to get into it. So before we start, we'd like to go into our first segment with Barbara on Barbara's soapbox moments.
Okay, thanks, Amber. I recently had a conversation with a friend of mine about the value to the CAM of CAM training. Because if you're in a compliance review and you're interviewed and you don't want to get caught flat-footed. Plus, if you are getting trained in a way, being trained and learning in a way where you then have the opportunity to really use the data, it's a 2-for-1. But sometimes CAMs just think it's a chore and they don't take it very seriously, or they just memorize the minimum to get through the interview and they don't take advantage of it to better understand their data. Because the expectation during a compliance review is that the CAM really is using the data. They're the linchpin of the system. So that's my soapbox moment for this week. Thanks, Amber.
And I'm going to do a little bit of explanation of acronyms. We haven't really done that on the podcast yet, but any guests who may be coming to us with earned value management non-knowledge, a CAM is the control account manager, and they are the manager over a control account. And the control account is classically found to be the control point intersection between the WBS, which is the work breakdown structure, and the OBS, which is the organizational breakdown structure. So
it's the point of measure.
Yeah. So
variance analysis. Okay, and we're back. We're very excited to be talking about the cost of EVM today because it is a constant problem. People have assumptions about what the costs are without having the evidence or the data. And our next guest, who needs no introduction, anybody know David Letterman? No? Okay. Meanwhile, back at the ranch. Ivan Bembers has played a very important role in our industry to dispel many of the myths about the cost of EVM. So without further ado, we're going to ask Ivan to introduce himself, and then Amber and I are going to ask him a series of questions. And we thank you, Ivan, for being here.
My pleasure. So, Ivan Bembers, I recently retired from federal service after over 20 years of experience in the government as an EVM focal point in a couple agencies in the intel community, and now consulting with Intro Management Solutions, and happy to be a part of this podcast. Thank you.
Okay, great. So, Ivan, I often find myself quoting the Joint Space Cost Council study, and I find people aren't familiar with it, and I'm always confused by that. As a matter of fact, I remember it was one of the first meetings at College of Performance Management when you and Michelle Jones came and gave us the pitch, and it was very compelling. And so why do you think it is that it isn't on the tip of everybody's tongue today?
And a bit before that, for someone who's newer and not as exposed, when was it released? And a little bit of history on it, too.
Okay. So, yeah, I don't have a great answer on why people don't recall it. I think people have short memories. So I think we have to remind ourselves and remember some of the history that we have building in our community. I will say that the Joint Space Cost Council, which was formed in 2009 to improve cost estimating methods, that was driven by the Pentagon and different industry forums, has a sub-council, and had one for EVM. And one of the challenges of FY13 in the Budget Control Act and sequestration was we were in a scarcity of budgets, and there was a lot of pressure on reducing costs, and program managers were encouraged to reduce costs and be open-minded about where to cut waste. And so one of the studies that were considered at the Joint Space Cost Council is jointly managed and led by both industry and government. There are at least 8+ aerospace defense companies that comprise that council in the U.S. space community. And NASA and Space and Missile Center, now Space Systems Command, I believe, and National Reconnaissance Office comprise the government side of it. And there's other government organizations invited into it. So we kicked off an analysis of the study. We had a room filled with 120 people. That we had an industry day where we collected all the inputs we needed to kick off the study. And so we listened thoughtfully to all the inputs from industry. We created a survey instrument in 2013. It took us a year to get it going. We worked with 5 aerospace defense companies. That's in the report that's online. And we got about 1,600 responses and 3,600 data points of data that we analyzed.
Isn't it true, Ivan, that is really an exceptional response to a survey, a voluntary survey? I think you guys did exceptionally well. I
think the government had tall fences around what was considered proprietary inputs from the aerospace defense companies. They trusted us. We were a trusted partner. We were in a unique position where we could create tall fences around the data so nobody could see anything. Anything that was given to us is not for attribution, could not be attributed to a company or to an organization. And so everything became sanitized in the report, but not without sacrificing the credibility of the results of the data. So when we studied it, we tried to create cross-cutting themes through EVM SME groups on the subcouncil for the study team. And so everybody participated, everybody was in consensus. We identified about three major themes that were cross-cutting. The first theme that was a cost driver to EVM was that the number of control accounts, the size and volume, can be a cost driver to EVM. And
I call that the art of EVM, actually. That is something that an algorithm can't fit for you. Where do you, as Amber was defining control account a few minutes ago when I was talking about the control account manager, where do you put the control account? If it's too low, what happens? You've got a lot of maintenance and it's harder to analyze the data. You just have almost too much data. And if it's too high, you don't have enough fidelity to determine the cause of the variances. So it's like a perfect. So why did industry come up with that? What did they talk to?
So we tried to connect.
I mean, your study, not industry.
Right. So we tried to connect all the dots of those thousands of inputs on it, and we first of all, when we started the study, we weren't actually trying to deduce or calculate the cost to EVM is what we rediscovered going after a set of data, prior studies. Cooper's and Lybrand study of the early 90s was one, and they calculated the cost using activity-based costing. That was like a less than 1% of a program. And then Dr. Christensen amassed about a dozen different studies shortly thereafter.
That's the one that's quoted all the time.
And I think from memory, it's like 3 to 5% he calculated it, and some people go up to 6%. But those studies were done
I'm going to pause there.
Yep.
3 to 5 or 6% of what?
Of the cost of a program, a cost of a contract.
Is it attributed to project management?
Is attributed to what they believed then was EVM, which was cost schedule systems control criteria era, where things were more paper-based, less automated, less systems integration, less COTS being used. And so when we started this study, we knew that we were in a different era of EVM and that the heritage analysis needed to be refreshed because we were no longer in a cost schedule systems control criteria environment. Things have changed in the next 20 years. And so in 2013 through 2015, we were trying to refresh that and get a better sense of it. But one thing that was reusable and very helpful to know was that we were evaluating the cost premium of EVMS because the cost of EVM is not segregable from project management, in my, what I'll say, my humble expert opinion. And that's reuse of knowledge from the Cooper's Lybrand era study, is that the attempt was to evaluate the cost premium. And the second phase of the study talked more about how that cost premium exists. The emphasis of the study was on if you're a commercial activity or on a firm fixed price contract or do an internal EVM, what is the extra effort required for government requirements for that cost premium that the government is willing to pay for, with procedural requirements, today the IPM DAR, then the IPMR and CPR IMS era. And I know those are more acronyms, Amber. And so what we wanted to do is, there's other management activities on top of procedurals that have to be evaluated. The cost of performing integrated baseline reviews that a contractor may not do in a firm fixed price contract, or on internal earned value management requirements. There might be other management activities such as oversight, surveillance, or compliance reviews. And so those management activities are additive for the cost premium that are standard requirements or ad hoc requirements that are being studied in that study 10 years ago. I'll pause there in case you have any more questions. So then from that, well, go ahead.
I do. You had talked to the three themes of cost drivers. So I want to circle back to that, but you sound like you were going somewhere else.
No, I was actually heading back. So
Okay.
the number, I'm paraphrasing because I don't have any notes in front of me, but it's the number of control accounts, which has, it could be a long conversation right there. There's lots of data behind it in the study. But that was a major driver. There's a lot of different reasons why the volume and size of control accounts are too many or too few. Span of control issues, how much risk, how much experience you have for your CAMs and leadership on a program, and all of those things. And the second one had to do more with a dynamic acquisition environment, uncertainty of scope, uncertainty of clarity of scope. Funding was exactly part of it. And then I put a little comma splice and said, just like any other program management practice in the second theme, because EVM isn't the driver of, even though a lot of the cost drivers, that were 78 of them that we studied, that industry asked for us to study in the survey. But when we did that and we grouped them together, there were a lot of cost drivers, the categories that were in the survey that were related to dynamic acquisition environments, scope uncertainty, scope clarity, funding uncertainty. And just as any other project management discipline, such as EVM is not the driver of that. It's the consequence of those things that drives up the cost of EVM. But there was a huge appetite to study it and understand it better and understand its contribution to it. And then the third one was that the volume and frequency of integrated baseline reviews, compliance and surveillance reviews can be a cost driver. Now, the government was neither for nor against the 78 cost drivers. We just studied it agnostically. And so I'm neither, from my perspective, leading the study, I was neither for nor against studying any of the cost drivers. So when I say cost driver, I'm neither for nor against the result that was studied. Now, industry didn't have any empirical data to say how much these things cost. They just knew that we studied it with a high, medium, and low impact analysis quantitatively. We didn't try to study the impact qualitatively. We didn't try to study it from the actual costs because nobody had any cost data. If they had it, it was anecdotal or it wasn't data driven. There could be some things that you can study and say that this is a cost driver, but it's not universally understood or agreed to across industry. And in conferences in the past, we've heard executives at a company say that the cost of project management is 8%, for instance, on a large program, maybe 12% for a small program. That was a vice president at one company at a major conference that was national at one time back in 2009. So we can anecdotally share that. But the cost of EVM against that, it's very difficult to do. So we have to say the cost premium of EVM based on the deliverable reports and other management activities that are contractually required. That's a premium that is otherwise different than what would be on a firm fixed price contract or a commercial effort or an internal effort. with EVM. And so I'll pause there unless you have any other questions.
Well, I know that back to theme 2, I was waiting for you to use the word customer. That that's the customer's fault, that they can't control the funding, or they keep changing the scope, or those sorts of things. So I mean, there's two sides of the table here, and it as much as the government likes to blame the contractor and why is it costing you so much, well, if the customer, the government in this case, is nickel and diming those changes, well then that costs money. So I think that it's important to understand that dynamic, that's where that was going. And the third theme is about, it sounded like you were going for compliance, is that right?
There was
I was going to say, I've heard people say that they thought the study came out and said that it's the reason EVM, it costs more than people want to pay, is because of the compliance aspect of it. So
anecdotally, that is true, but when we studied it, that didn't jump out at us. It was just the theme that came out of it was that cross-cutting theme is that there's still a sensitivity by the SMEs that said that the frequency of integrated baseline reviews, compliance and surveillance reviews can be a cost driver. One company anecdotally said when we were setting the survey up together was that they couldn't discern the difference between an IBR and a surveillance review because they were the same. And so that was an action I took internally when I was in government to be compartmentalized, to say, to a fault, because I was critiqued by my esteemed colleagues in government at times for trying not to make sure that CAMs were articulate and could defend their plan well enough for CAM skills. My focus was razor sharp because of the other critiques I got, that our reviews became achievability assessments of the baseline, and I tried not to perform inherent surveillance activities at IBRs when we were facilitating and helping lead those. But I did get critique both ends of the spectrum. But I tried to err on the side more of achievability assessment, risk assessment of the performance measurement baseline, more than making sure the CAM was qualified to do the job, if you follow my drift.
I have a lot of IVR experience myself, and I definitely have heard you speak on that in the past, and I listened, and I also tried very hard. The process that I used had, put the findings in 5 buckets, with management process being one of them, technical, budget, schedule risk. But the thing is that all roads lead back to process. Mm-hmm. If you were doing it the way you said you were going to do it, well, we wouldn't be at this point of confusion. But also, in my experience, the IBR, it's easy to get program control people to be on the IBR team. It's hard to get technical people who can really look at the schedule and say, you skipped a test. What happened to INT kind of thing. And PP&C people, well, we can pick out INT, but that I think that contributes to why it turns into.
All I can say is that in my environment, I was very close to the mission, and so the appetite of my senior leadership and by program managers was, is this plan achievable or not, and where's the risk, and that we are smart enough to know how to deal with addressing process issues during execution, and so. They wanted to put the focus on IBRs to more on the technical aspects of how the technical baseline's aligned with inside the PMB, and that it's achievable, risk adjusted, that we have a deterministic critical path we can understand, and that we have enough resources to finish the job. So,
how long before the PMB was set would the IBR be conducted?
That depends. That depends on if in my environment where I came from, if it was a space acquisition or software intensive program. In the advent of agile, software development methods, scaled agile framework, we were under pressure to go faster, and so we were pushing harder. That it wasn't when we did the IBRs, when the supplier, the contractor, was able to implement and prepare the performance measurement baseline. Give us at least a week or two to review the data and be ready to do the review. So our goal was to go as fast as the contractor could put the initial plan together and incrementally adjust to the incremental aspects of incremental planning through program increments or planning iterations.
Yeah. Well, one other sort of horror story I know that we talked about when we were preparing for this was that I heard the other day a friend of mine tell me that the program they were working on wanted to run a baseline change request because they needed to review invoices. And they were distributing $10,000 over a 3-year period to review invoices because they didn't want to risk having to write a variance. Did you want to comment on that?
Well, it sounds maybe unfortunate. But I will say that when we had a value phase, which I don't know if we have time to get into today, but the report is published. And then we had a synthesis write-up of how we merged value versus cost, and then tried to find if there was an opportunity to address high cost versus low value. We surveyed government program managers that were at NASA, SMC, and the NRO. And I think we had under 40 surveys that we evaluated. We identified their list of themes and valued what they valued. The IMS was very high. The metrics was very high. And so there was really nothing. It was interesting that back when we had the IPMR format too, the performance by OBS, that was something that was not well understood in the survey. So it was a training opportunity. IMPs were not valued as much by program managers in the U.S. space community. I know IMPs are still around today, but there's a challenge with integrated master plans. That's a training opportunity and implementation challenge. With product-oriented OBSs versus IMP planning. That's a long conversation as well, if you get into it. So when we did with the value and we plotted against the cost drivers analysis and the synthesis analysis phase, as well I call it, we tried to look for high cost, low value return. We didn't actually find as much. Everything kind of grouped to not high cost without being valued per se, and that's documented in the study as well. But we did find things that were towards the margin that could be further looked at. So we made recommendations in a report. And in 2017, we published in the Defense AT&L Acquisition Technology and Logistics DAU magazine a short a report of the entire study. And we did the best we could without having a dollarized input in the study. That we believed that after we did the synthesis phase, that the cost premium of EVMS implementation was a fraction of 1% in the modern EVMS era, based on educated, informed awareness from the results of the 4-year study.
With that small amount, dollar quantification, my initial interpretation is that it could be extrapolated that EVMS, the implementation of EVMS, should not be seen as a separate requirement from
Project management.
project management. Was that one of the takeaways?
Yeah, I think that was a learning thing through the 4 years. Was when everyone started the study, they wanted to know what the cost of EVMS was because everyone thought it was unaffordable. The going in perception or bias, anecdotal information. And one of the beauties of the study was that we were able to weed out the anecdotal from the data-driven results. And the data-driven results were unclassified, not proprietary, and are still available today through the JSCC and the current leadership of it. It's up to them how they release it. But we said at the time that we published the results that it could be independently verified and updated with more surveys if need be, following the same methodologies going forward. But I'm out of government now, so it's not my call. But in any case, that was the power of that survey. And while we didn't have a dollarized empirical result based on the study, we were able to deduce from it that after we went through the synthesis phase, that we had no basis of believing it was more than a fraction of a percent. And we didn't have the same problems that were experienced during the 20-year period before when a similar study was done by Coopers and Lybrand, even though the methodology was different with activity-based costing.
Do you think that the people the industry partners that you had on the council, do you think that any of them changed their behavior as a result of this knowledge that was provided? I mean, the information that came from the data?
I think that's a great question. I think people were turning over continuously throughout the study, except for my team, and that faces and names and positions change over time.
Right.
So I think temporally, the company's views maybe didn't change. I think it was informative. People were very impressed with what they learned from it and were very eager to come up with recommendations to improve policies, practices, training, and implementation methods. I shared one about integrated baseline reviews, trying to get more focused on the baseline as opposed to processes in my environment. Not everyone agrees with me on that elsewhere in the government, but I'm neither for nor against having full agreement on that. Everyone has different reasons for some of that, but I took to heart what I learned from it. I tried to reduce the cost of certain activities that the government puts on contract that's above and beyond that which is firm fixed price or commercial. But there are reasons why, if the government if our job is to protect the public trust on a cost reimbursable or cost and incentive type contract, we do have a premium to pay to be at risk with the government at the time to be on these contracts, that there are extra requirements you have to put on when it's not firm fixed price. And so to protect the public trust, we have to have those requirements, those procedurals and those management activities to do that. And so it's appropriate. But at the same time, so we're not trying to get rid of those, but if there's anything that's perceived or actually found as being inefficient or not affordable, then there's opportunities to have trade space to evaluate how to lean out or eliminate any waste or unnecessary requirements, and that's what we studied.
It's very compelling, and I'm sort of disappointed in my experience of people learning and relearning about it. You know, I feel like it needed a road show or something. You know, we needed more promotion. It should have been talked about every spring and fall. It just, I don't know. But we're doing our part, aren't we, Amber?
We are. But I think also, in my experience and exposure with earned value, having been in it less time than both of you, but not, maybe half the time.
Mm-hmm. I'm older than I look.
There are, I don't want to feel chastised for not knowing things from before, right? I would like to take the ball and keep going with it. I'd like to be an advocate for wherever we're going.
Well, actually, I think we haven't touched on IP2M meter yet. That's an acronym. But I think it's kind of a follow-on to it. And I think it has parallels, and I think it talks to the cost. And one of the most compelling things is, do you remember Joe Hauser? Mm-hmm. So Joe Hauser published, segues right to IP2M meter, but Joe Hauser published in the Measurable News back when that was a journal out of CPM. We were at the FAA. And FAA has a WBS, a standard WBS, and it has one cleverly named project management. And almost in an anecdotal way, that we didn't have a scatter plot or regression analysis or anything like that. But basically, it was very compelling because we could, plus or minus, find out how much money a project was spending on project management and then associate it with how their performance was. And the projects that had, better performance metrics, just using SPI and CPI, spent less money on project management. And that, that's the heat map that is in the IP2M meter, where it talks to when you have a more mature culture, you come in on budget and within schedule. It's just, it isn't expensive, but people, I feel like there's like an elephant in the room. I think, people, they don't want to tell their customer what's going on. How does that help them? Does it get them more money? I mean, they want the gravy train flowing, and they don't want any help. They don't really want their customer to know how they're performing because it doesn't help their bottom line. And that's human nature, right there. Teaching human nature right here on our podcast. So, that's why I just like the role of senior management support. These things just happen. It just, like you were saying, Ivan, how can people still be talking about the cost of EVM? We solved that riddle 10 years ago. Why are we all still learning it and still learning it and still learning it? And I think it's the elephant in the room is that, earned value tells you what's going on in the project, and not everybody wants that known. So they blame the messenger.
But then that sounds like the IPtometer concept of culture in being okay with those uncomfortable conversations, getting the information, data-driven decisions. The more data you have, the better you can correct. So, and the quicker you can correct to make impact. There's a beautiful chart that Ivan has designed that I've seen in the analysis engines where there's a perfect spot where within that band you take action, you can more effectively or quickly or impact for greater project success. Does this ring a bell, Ivan?
I'm trying to remember which graphic we're talking about, but yeah.
Many graphics.
There were bands of color above and below and inside.
Yeah.
Does this one ring a bell?
Maybe.
I talk to it often.
Okay.
Yeah, I need to go back and find the name of that graphic.
Yeah.
But it was basically, if the project is within this band and you take action, you're more probable to have project success.
Oh, okay, yeah. That might be the spectrum chart I used to show. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
I couldn't agree with you more, Barbara, about EVM it's data-driven. People are worried about who has insight into my data and who's communicating the status of the program that's not controlled by me, the program manager, and accountability. Who's going to determine what the result of that information is and it being accountable for it. And so it's a tricky wicket. Anything that creates accountability is tough. And then the affordability versus waste versus value versus cost conundrums proliferate because of that. And that's been the bane of our existence professionally for those of us in the job. For as long as you're in it, you're a part of that phenomenon. So it is what it is.
Yeah, it is what it is. Well, I'm out of questions on this topic. How about you, Amber?
all right. Let's do a little bit of Amber's amblings, which
Okay.
are just some random things that popped out at me while we were all talking. And I have ample caffeine, so we're going to do these a little more slowly than possibly normal. There aren't many, actually. I think that Ivan really dug in nicely, and you guys bounced back and forth. But when you were talking about the cost driver, Ivan, the number of control accounts, and then you kind of open it up to span of control, that to me is a key area. When is a control account too large? And how can you really assess that, right? During a CAM interview, how do you even know if that CAM has control or not? One visual that I use, that I've used in reviews, is a bubble chart that has SPI and CPI with a box of one, and then you see for each control account where are the work packages within that.
Oh, their size.
Their size, the size, the BAC of that work package for that control account, and then where within a box of one, maybe it's 0.1. I was
For their CPI and SPI?
SPI, CPI.
Okay.
Are you familiar with this chart? It's pretty cool. And then if you see
Empower
them,
has it.
Empower, one of their charts. If you see them really getting out of that range, you can know where to identify this particular control account, this particular CAM possibly isn't able to control that amount of work.
I mean, when I was in government, one of the questions that we would ask is, what's the levels of skill mix that exist in the program? What's the population of CAMs on that skill mix? How much turnover of CAMs do you have? What training is available for those people, and how do you maintain that? And so to make it sustainable. And so when you do that, you can evaluate then if a person has low skill mix or is a lower skill mix, more junior, they should not be assigned a larger WBS element that create that management control point of assigning responsibility for a corresponding element of the WBS. That management control point might not be too big. But if someone's trying to control the sizes of control accounts and not proliferate it, then in theory you're increasing the skill mix of CAMs, and to right size that. And so I think there should be a study or an evaluation or analysis of that on any program. It's a fair question to ask, and and then see what the answers are. But there are situations where control accounts just might be too big. And oftentimes that topic comes up with major subcontracts, where you might see one control account on a program that could be huge. And who is that appropriate CAM, and how do you have visibility and performance, or other even prime labor on that case? So I think it's a nuanced conversation, and certainly the report that we wrote, phase 1, got into a lot of detail and recommendations on how to think through some of that stuff. But everyone resonated with that first theme on the study. And you could extend it to the size and volume of work packages and planning packages, which has an inherent relationship to the number of control accounts you have. If you have too few control accounts, you're going to have massive numbers of work packages, planning packages. They might have longer durations. Then that creates its own pros and cons and problems. So it's a little bit of a whack-a-mole scenario with that. It ripples through the system. The number of work authorizations you have to sign, the number of VARs you have to write. There's pros and cons with any decision made, and there's no right or wrong solution, but there's certainly optimal solutions that could be considered.
I mean, to me, we have had a big problem with this on some of the assignments I've been on. And in my mind, a CAM should pass a litmus test where they're the person actually doing these 3 things. They're the person sitting with the scheduler and providing the status. They themselves are doing that. They don't have a team of people providing that status. I think those team of people are probably each CAMs then. I think that they write the variance analysis themselves, and they don't have to go to somebody else and say, hey, what prompted this? I mean, not that they don't get additional information and details and things like that, but they know why that variance popped without having to ask anybody else, because they are that person on the line doing it. And I don't know, what do you guys think the third thing should be? I'm having a complete senior moment. They're providing the status, they're doing the variance, and they're doing the estimating.
Yeah.
I mean, they can have people, I'm not denying that you aren't being resourceful, but they're the ones going, I need Ivan to do this, I need Amber to do that, I got 10 other people, this is how this is going to work. One IBR I was on, I really enjoyed it, where the CAM responded. They said, well, they gave me a canned WBS structure, and then to a certain level, and then I broke it down further. And she said, I wanted to do it because I wanted more charge codes, collecting actuals, so that I would have better estimating data for the future. Because I do the same, engineering thing over and over again on all these projects, and they always come to me for the estimating data, and I don't really have it. So now I'm collecting it myself, and that's how I break down the work. And she does all that, Yeah, that's right. Otherwise, I think you end up with super CAMs where they think that they're helping. Oh, we won't make you a CAM. You don't have to do all that extra training. You're not going to be burdened with all these management responsibilities. But that's how it works. That's called project management. That's the job. You can't save them from that. If you want to do the technical, you got to talk about how much it's going to cost and when it's going to get done. And if you're not that point person, then go down and work in the workshop and turn the screws. Peace. All right. Are we wrapping up, Amber?
All right. I think that's great. We had a great show. Thank you very much, Ivan, for being here.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. So thank you all for being here and tuning in for this long. And
thank you from Let's Talk EVM.